Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my spoiler-free review for Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I love this book. Alright, so starting off with the summary, really basic summary. We follow a girl named Rin in this book who starts off in poverty and has to study to take a test that will grant her admission into the most prestigious military academy in her country. So she studies nonstop for this test, and if she gets into that military academy, she will be trained as a soldier to fight in the army. And that's all I'm going to say about the summary. So there are a lot of mixed reviews for this book out there, and I can totally see why. That's what I want to address during this video today. I want to tell you why personally I loved it and why it may not work for certain types of readers. And that way, hopefully, you'll get a better idea of whether or not this book would work for you and if you want to pick it up. So, first things first, I want to preface this video by saying I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars easily. It's one of my top 10 favorite fantasies now. I loved it, but I would not necessarily recommend it to everyone, and I'll go into a little more detail on why, but the biggest thing I want to make sure to warn folks about before you even decide whether or not you want to pick this up is that this book had a scene in it that is one of the most horrific and graphic and violent scenes I have ever read in any book. And it honestly really stuck with me. It's not for the faint of heart. If you do not like any very violent, graphic gore, this is not the book for you. And I don't want to like scare everyone off by saying that. I think it's really well done, and when I go into a little bit more of the reasoning behind why I like this book, I'll tell you a little bit more about why I think it was well done. But that is something I just want to make sure is very clear. This book is unbelievably graphic and is one of the hardest things I've ever read. It's for this one scene. The whole book isn't like that. It's this one very specific scene. And if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Now let's actually get into my review. So there are kind of 3 main parts of this review that kind of address the reasons why I personally loved it, but why I've also seen some people not love this book. So first of all, I want to start off with something that I think is good to know before reading the book going into it, and that is the context behind this book. And that's one of the reasons why I loved it, is because I had the context. So luckily, this book was a buddy read with a lot of us in the Shelf Space Book Club Discord server. It was an optional buddy read. And so we were chatting a lot, and Alan over at the Library of Allenxandria, he was a part of the buddy read, and he is a history teacher, which is brilliant because he knew all of the real life history and events that R.F. Kuang was inspired by to write this book. So he let us know about a lot of the real life parallels that this book was based on, and that made me appreciate it and just left so much more of an impact on me knowing that it was all based on real life, and that was so brilliant. He's actually going to do a full video on the real life history of the Poppy War. I don't know when he's going to put it up. If he's put it up already, I'm definitely going to link it in the description box down below for you guys to go check out. And if he hasn't, but he does later on, I'll make sure to update my description box because I think that's going to be such an awesome video. So he's going to go into all the real life events and such, but as a quick kind of general overview, this book is heavily inspired by the Sino-Japanese War and has a very specific event in it that was inspired by the rape of Nanking or Nanjing. So knowing that, you can probably guess the level of gore and violence you're going to get if you know anything about that particular historical event and this war. It so closely follows the real life beats and events of this war that you can very easily tell which fantasy names represent each different country in our world. That is how closely it follows everything. So that, knowing that context made me appreciate this book to an entirely different level. I personally love that this was based on a real life historical event and war. I think that it brings a lot of attention to it. So this was something that I never learned about in school, and I just love that idea. Some people aren't going to love that idea. If you don't want to read a fantasy book based on a real life event or war, then I would not recommend this to you. But if that sounds really interesting to you, please read this book because it is so fascinating and it just made me now want to go and learn more. And I think that if a book can do that, that is unbelievable. It's so awesome that R.F. Kuang took real experiences that her family experienced and wrote them in this fantasy book. So of course, you still get the magic thrown in, and there are some things, you know, that aren't going to be actual real life things. But there are so many ways that you can draw parallels to things that happened in real life. And I think I am going to have a spoiler part of this review so that I can talk a little bit more about the specifics of that. So that, first of all, knowing that context, that kind of took it to the next level for me and made me give it 5 stars easily because I just loved that. And the messages that it was able to explore with that and how it really didn't glorify war whatsoever and how it really showed who the real victims of war are, it's great. So if that sounds interesting to you, this is your book. The next thing I found that I loved, but is not going to be for every reader, is going to be characters, particularly Rin as a main character, because Rin is complex. She is not the most likable human being. So I think there's an important distinction to make here, right? Because there are some people who are character-driven readers and you want to love your characters as human beings. Like, you want to be able to either relate to them or you want to root for them and want the best for them. And if you're that kind of reader where you want your protagonist to be heroic, to be righteous, to stand for something, then I don't think this is going to be your favorite book, unless you're more of a plot-driven reader and don't mind if you feel a little bit more of a disconnect from the characters. Because Rin is not a likable human being, but I loved her as a character. As a character, she is so complex. She changes a lot in this book. She has a very clear arc to her, and she makes a lot of mistakes and stupid decisions, and you just want to shake her sometimes, but I love that in a character. I love characters that are very, very morally gray, that aren't the hero, that think they're the hero in their own mind, yet they're not doing the right thing whatsoever. I love that stuff. So if you are not someone who loves that kind of thing, I don't think this is going to be your favorite book of all time, because your main character is really stubborn. She's really frustrating. She's going to make you mad. I personally loved her for it. So I loved Rin, not as a human being, but as a character. I also think the side characters in this book added so much to it. Side characters like Kate were amazing, Jiang was amazing. Like, all of these characters I thought were so much fun to follow. Overall, side characters I thought were really, really well done. And then there were some that you just are like, I hate you. And it's so like fun to feel that passion for some of these characters. Like, if an author can make me feel so strongly about a character, either I love them so much or I hate them so much, that's when it works for me. If I'm just like meh about a character, then that's when I'm not gonna like it. So if you're similar to me in that way, then I really think you're gonna like this book. The next thing that I've seen some criticism on and some people love is the structure of the book and the tone. So this book is split into 3 different parts, where part 1, you're very much in this YA kind of school setting. Rin is a teenager, she's young, it's very, very fast paced, and some people say it reads like a more YA novel because of the pacing, because of the age of the characters and what they're going through and all these sorts of things. And then you get to part 2 and there is this huge shift in tone where you're in it, you're in the thick of war, you're in these battles, and it's very, very dark. So this kind of tonal shift halfway through the book is not going to be appealing for everybody. A lot of people may prefer one part to the other because of how different they feel. The first part of the book, it feels very young adult almost, and that's not to knock it. That's actually one of the positives for me because I like YA fantasies. I like young adult books. So part one of this book really worked for me because I personally love the fast pace, the get to the point. I loved the school setting because we didn't drag it on and on and on, and the training sequences, we didn't drag it on and on and on. It got to the point, it got to where we needed our characters to be, and it moved on. And I loved that. And then I loved part two for everything I love in adult fantasy. I loved the differences in the characters that we were starting to see. I loved how dark and gritty it got. I loved all of the strategizing and the military and war aspect. Man, it was so good. So I really don't prefer one part over the other, but a lot of people are, and that's totally fine. If you prefer part one, totally fine. And that's where I see a lot of people, say that there's a disconnect because of that shift. So again, not going to be for everybody, but it totally worked for me. And then the last thing I have to talk about before I get into spoilers is writing style. So for me, I am not super picky with writing style, where I actually prefer more direct, simple writing. So I like books that get to the point. I don't like overly flowery descriptions upon descriptions. I prefer more straightforward writing. I don't want to ever feel like writing takes me out of the story, like I'm trying to figure out how that metaphor makes sense or something like that. So for me, the simplified, more direct writing style in the Poppy War 100% connected. It never took me out of the story. It allowed me to really, really focus on it instead. Whereas some people are gonna be like, oh, why is this writing so simple? It's very, very direct. So if you do not like your writing styles like that, 100% valid. And Poppy War may not be your favorite because of it. But for me, writing style, I'm so not picky. So if a book is just able to totally capture me and hook me and doesn't take me out of the story because of the writing, I'm gonna enjoy it. So writing style for me, it worked. I was able to completely escape into the book. I loved the pacing of it, and it worked for me. So overall, if you don't mind violence, if you don't mind characters who are not likable human beings but are awesome characters, and if you don't mind your books, your fantasy books being based off of real life wars and historical events, especially more recent historical events, this is all 20th century stuff. So it's not like we're even pulling from centuries and centuries ago. If you like those kinds of books, then Poppy War might be your book. If that does not sound like it is appealing to you, then I would not recommend this book to you, and that is 100% okay. So overall, 5 stars. Hopefully this helped you decide whether or not you wanted to pick it up. And now I really, really want to go into spoilers because I really want to talk a lot more about the specifics behind the real life kind of context and the parallels that I chatted about with our buddy readers, and then also some of the stuff that Rin did. So thank you all for watching if you're clicking off, and now let's get into spoilers. Okay, so first of all, real life stuff. So this was so fascinating. I watched interviews with R.F. Kuang and how she based all of the magic system off of real life shamanism, and it's all based off of feeling a connection to the gods by being lost in kind of these drug-induced hallucinations. So a lot of the stuff that she was including in her book with, taking the poppy seeds or taking the opium and totally emptying your mind to try to connect with the gods in a different realm, that is all actually based off of real-life shamanism and a lot of the stuff that they believe in. So I think that is so fascinating to me that we took this fantasy magic system, but based it off of this real life religion. I love that stuff. That stuff I eat up in books. I just love it. And so the magic system, kind of talking a little bit more about it and how it inspired these themes of, you know, the gods and interacting with them and who they serve. Do they really serve us or do they serve themselves? I loved all of those themes and those discussions that it brought up, and how the gods in this book really aren't the good guys. They are actually totally out for themselves. And it's also a question of what Rin was kind of questioning at the end, where it's like, are the gods that powerful if they rely so heavily on human intervention to give them that power? They're powerless without a human granting them power. So all of that stuff I loved. I loved all of the discussion it brought around all of the gods. So that was one of the things that was really appealing to me. The other thing I wanted to talk about based off of the real life stuff is, of course, chapter 21. Chapter 21 is the rape of Nanking or Nanjing, and I don't know about you guys, but all of that stuff, the fact that R.F. Kuang didn't make any of that up from her own imagination, that all was actual things that people did, was one of the hardest reading experiences ever for me. And I had to put it down. It evoked such strong emotion from me. I was crying. The fact that it left such an impact on me is very, very indicative of how connected I felt to the writing style, to the characters, to just the world that she had built. And it's really a testament to her ability as an author to evoke such emotion from me. So I don't know if anyone else felt as strongly about chapter 21, but that one, it was the hardest thing I have ever read, knowing that it was based off of real life accounts. The other thing is, so some of the Rin stuff. So Rin is interesting. So when I was describing the tone shift and kind of from part 1 to part 2, it was a lot of how Rin's character was acting. So Rin in part 1, I love that she was cocky, that she was just in it for the glory and thought like, I'm the best, I can totally do this. And then the minute we hit part 2 and the minute she gets confronted with a real life battle is the minute she is like, oh my God, I'm terrified. And I loved that. I loved that Rin, when she actually saw what was coming, was terrified and was no longer the Rin that we saw in part 1. And I think that that is really a testament to how a lot of people think of war. You're confronted with how vicious it is, with how real and horrible, and it's just, it's like, I can't even imagine. So I love that R.F. Kuang did that with Rin, that she really made her feel like, oh yeah, I'm unstoppable, I'm invincible, I'm a tough fighter, I'm the best in my class. And it's like, when you get to apply it in real life, it's a totally different story. I don't think we see that enough, that realistic depiction of soldiers and fighters in fantasy, that real life fear that you feel. I loved it. I loved the shift in Rin's character, and she was never really the same. She was never really that same Rin that we saw in part 1. That was one of the things that I loved about Rin's character. And then the other thing with the very, very end, when she just decimates the Federation of Mugen and feels nothing. That imagery that R.F. Kuang described in the aftermath of how they saw Mugen just completely decimated and just the cloud of ash and just all of that, it reminded me a lot of the atomic bomb. And that was so powerful to me, and how she tried to rationalize it in her head, right? She thought, I did the right thing, and how she's turning into what she hated. I love R.F. Kuang's character work here and how she's just putting Rin through it all and just really just tearing this girl apart, this poor girl. And I know that Rin at the end, when she's trying to justify her actions with Mugen, how she doesn't really believe it herself, right? Because she second guesses herself. And it's gonna be so tragic when she wakes up to see that she has become what she hated. And man, that is powerful stuff. I love this book. I loved all the discussion it sparked in our Discord server. It's been so much fun buddy reading this book because it's so fascinating to talk about all these different themes and draw these parallels to real life. So if you've read it, what did you think of it? Were you kind of like, eh? Were you one of the ones who was like, it's overrated? And that's totally fine. That's totally fine if you were. I don't blame you. I mean, again, I can totally see why this isn't for everybody, but I'm so glad it worked for me. I am so glad it worked for me and that I loved it. And I'm so excited to read The Dragon Republic now because everyone keeps telling me it's somehow even better than The Poppy War. And I'm like, how can it get better? But I'm so excited. And even R.F. Kuang herself was like, yeah, The Poppy War was the boring prequel I had to write. Dragon Republic and Burning God are where it's really at. And I'm like, oh my God, Poppy War was great. So I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say in the comments down below. Love chatting with you guys about books. So thank you all so much for watching my Poppy War review. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday, and sometimes bonus ones like this one. So until next time, bye!